From a pastoral perspective in the Horn of Africa, we know what the types of shocks are, the conflict, the drought, the flood, the livestock disease, etc., etc. But when I talk about drought, one of the things that my recent trips, I've just spent a month in Ethiopia, and early in the year I was back in Karamoja again with Tufts. One of the things that's very interesting is this term drought now is being expanded to, a drought can be just sort of even a 6-month drought. There is no such thing as a 6-month drought according to pastoralists. Pastoralists see drought as a slow onset, more than 12 months of little or no rain, at least 2 seasons of failed rains, and then a serious drought is 3 consecutive failed rains, and typically in the Horn of Africa is associated with these La Nina events. But what I think the last couple of trips have shown me, and building on obviously years of experience living and working there, is that we look very much at shocks, but we don't look so much at trends. And I think that the trends are having as much of a problem on the impact on pastoralism and the viability of pastoralism. And so I've picked out a few things that I think are driving protracted crises in the Horn of Africa from a pastoral perspective. Poorly informed negative stereotypes, that pastoralists are always backward and uncivilized, and that narrative has not really changed, in the Horn of Africa very much from a government perspective. And if we look at some things like the economics of even irrigation compared to pastoralism, we actually see that the pastoralism comes out quite well. But the governments, most governments in the Horn of Africa don't want to listen to that at all. So the Benki study in Afar kind of makes it very clear that pastoralism is as good, if not as better than irrigated agriculture. We've still got policies, and looking at this systems approach, we've still got, while we're doing development and humanitarian systems in pastoral areas, we've still got things like forced sedentarisation, restricted mobility, investment in irrigated agriculture, which take out the best parts of the pastoral system. And the outcomes are obviously underinvestment in the right sectors, poor service delivery still, and this massive extractive economy that's going on in all pastoral areas, where they're taking out things like phosphates and salt or livestock or whatever it is, and we've still got serious human rights abuses and delayed drought response. So if we look at some of the impacts, natural, we've got degrading and rapidly degrading rangelands in most of the Horn of Africa, and we've got weakening social systems, and particularly custom leaders. Just pick out a couple of things. A study done by Peter Little and others, John McPeak, comes up from north of Kenya. We need about 4.5 tropical livestock units. You know what tropical livestock units are. One is about 10 sheep, and it's about 0.7 of a cow and 1.2 of a camel. What we basically need, to get a threshold of welfare, we need about 4.5 tropical livestock units per adult equivalent. If we look at the figures we've got recently, and just picked out 2 of the places I visited recently, in 2016 in Afar, if we look at by wealth quintile, the poorest is 0.2. And we need 4.5 to get some kind of level of welfare. And even at the highest level, it's 8.9, and that is by household, not by adult equivalents. So we're way off beam. In Karamoja, the result of the protected corrals and the government's approach to dealing with the issue of insecurity, they lost thousands and thousands and thousands of livestock. So numbers, even in the richest household, went down to 2.6. So we're kind of way off base. So all the statistics that we read about poverty, levels of poverty in pastoral areas in the Horn of Africa, I think are woefully wrong. There's massive levels of poverty. If we look at that compared to the household economy approach, which misses some of these things, we're looking just at this as a very simple threshold level of the number of tropical livestock units that are required. Other things that we've got, looking at the outcomes of some of these sort of the impact of crises and the impact of trends, we've got horrendous levels of stunting. So in fact, in Afar, we've actually got an increase in the level of stunting from 2011 to 2016. We've got 59% of kids that are stunted in these pastoral areas. In Uganda, in Karamoja, they say it's going down, but I think some of those can be, but still way higher than the national average. What are we doing wrong? Despite it was developed in the 1980s, we still don't have very many projects that take on board the need to plan for drought as part of the planning cycle. We have that as a risk, but actually it's part of the day-to-day life in a pastoral area. So how is it that we can have development projects which are de-linked from the threat of drought? Again, what we have, generally speaking, is we have a separation out of humanitarian and development. In most projects we have, on the development side, we have people working on, say, for example, customary land tenure systems, or protecting migratory routes, or participatory rangeland management, etc., etc. That they do that as a development project. And then the others come along and they do emergency interventions. What we're trying to say here, I think, there's some of the good practice lessons coming from good programs where developers take the lead, is that by using this drought cycle management approach, that projects build in this flexibility. So in the normal years, in the good years, they can be working on some of these longer term issues, on early warning systems and the community-based animal health, etc., etc. But in the drought times, they shift that funding round so that they can look at particularly livestock emergencies, guidelines, interventions and standards, those sorts of things. So you shift your flexible funding, you move it round, and you have a system whereby within the same project you can be working on a number of different things. In particular, as in different areas you've often got drought going at different time. And then for ex-pastoralists, a completely different set of interventions. Many projects in Ethiopia, for example, just as a little example of how crazy some of these systems are, the productive safety net in the pastoral areas of Ethiopia targets rural people. Well, the poor are not in the rural areas. The poor have already been forced out of pastoralism because they've not got enough tropical livestock units to keep them wandering around on the range. They're actually settled in little towns and little villages. The safety net isn't allowed to work with people that are settled in towns and villages. So they're not dealing with a chronically food insecure. So there's a kind of complete mismatch there. Just a couple of the benefits that we can go when we've got projects that are doing development work, and these are from two projects that we're dealing with. They were development projects, but they took on this responsive, more emergency focus during the life cycle of that project, the life cycle of that project. And those are some of just the benefit cost ratios that came from a development project doing emergencies. And I think this is one of the key kind of findings of my work and I suppose my lifetime of experience is I don't like to see humanitarians arriving in pastoral areas doing humanitarian work. I much prefer that development projects that are already in those areas take on board responsibilities for trying to address crises. And policy opportunities for people in DFID, unless we get governments in the Horn of Africa to value and recognise pastoralism, we're going nowhere. Unless we get them to stop, or encourage them to stop doing human rights abuses, we're going nowhere. Unless we stop funding them to do irrigation schemes that take out the best bits of pasture, we're going nowhere. Unless we start to address those critical issues and get over this issue of desertification and pastoralist cause desertification, I don't think we will get anywhere ever. That's the paradigm that is driving impoverishment for me in pastoral areas. Flexible funding, as I've said, mainstreaming, drought cycle management and livestock emergencies guidelines, and important to step up learning. One of the things that a study by Jeremy Lind recently has done is that we don't have any comparable data across the different pastoral areas, even of the Horn of Africa. We're measuring different things in different ways. We've got very few longitudinal data sets to track what's happening in terms of the impact of development and humanitarian assistance. Really very difficult.